Baseball Tonight, the podcast.
This is the Baseball Tonight podcast for Wednesday, March 8th, 2017. I'm Buster Olney, and our esteemed producer is Josh Macri. Well, today we'll be speaking with Matt Holliday of the Yankees. That sounds strange. He'll go rapid fire. Jesse Rogers will talk about how the Cubs are going to deal with Major League Baseball's new hazing guidelines, because we know the Cubs love their crazy outfits. Tim Kurkjian will tell you about a breakout candidate. But first, some news and notes. Chris Archer is part of Team USA. He's going to start their opener, and he talked about the importance of the WBC.
Just that we are all unified, at least in my opinion. And it is a beautiful country of diversity and freedom and a lot of other things that other countries don't have. So for this moment in time, for this next 2 weeks, we're going to put on this jersey with pride and show we're diverse, we're united, and what USA is really all about.
One of the big conversations around the Cubs all year is going to be the impending free agency of Jake Arrieta, and he was on ESPN Chicago talking about that on Tuesday.
I don't want this to be a distraction for the guys in the clubhouse. I think it's unfair to them to have to answer questions about my situation individually, and I'd like to keep the focus as much as possible on the guys that are in that clubhouse with me, and I think it'll bode well for us, as the season progresses. But, it's hard to overlook because it is a situation that's, in the near future, and it is what it is. It'll be the first time in my career and other players' careers where you actually have, some leverage and the ability to decide for yourself what you would like to do moving forward. But I'm sure you guys understand that the best thing to do for me and for the rest of the guys is to try and eliminate the distractions as much as possible and just try to go out there and win some games.
The home of Yasiel Puig was robbed. According to police, at least $170,000 in property. Most of it jewelry was taken from Puig's home. No one was home at the time. There were games, of course, on Tuesday. Red Sox and the Nationals.
One pitch. Mookie hammers this one to left field. Way back it goes. It is 1-0 Boston. A solo home run for Mookie Betts. His first home run of the spring, an absolute no-doubter.
Mookie Betts did that 31 times last year. And the Red Sox are on top with their 13th homer of the spring.
Hanley hitting 300. He has a home run. 6 runs batted in. 3-1 from Ross. On the way, the kick and the pitch. And Hanley hammers one deep to left field. This one's farther than Mookie's, and this one is out of here. A home run for Ramirez as Hanley and Mookie go back-to-back. It's 2-0 Boston.
That was a bomb.
That's up to the concourse.
Backed out of the WBC for the Dominican Republic. He had some shoulder stiffness. Didn't look like it there. That ball was tattooed.
That montage courtesy of WEI and Masson Sports. John Lackey had a good day, a couple of scoreless innings, and he talked about that with reporters.
Stuff in between starts to get harder the older you get, the workouts and that kind of stuff. But, when you're out on the field competing, that's still a lot of fun. Honestly, in spring training, it doesn't matter who's standing up there. I kind of got a routine that what I do my first start, the second start, and, the last probably 2 starts before the season, I'll pitch, pretty much with everything, and then go get them.
That sound courtesy of MLB.com. Also, this sound from MLB.com. Sandy Alderson on the Mets spring questions.
I'd say the biggest question mark is the bullpen, just because of what's in store for Familia. The kinds of things we'd like to see this season, less reliance on the home run, better with men in scoring position, a little higher on base percentage, those things from an offensive standpoint. And then the 5 guys have got to go out there and pitch every 5th day. I think that's something that we will only really know over time.
Andy Pettitte was in Yankees camp, sounded very happy.
It's spring training. When you land and it's just, when you come down to spring training, it brings back a lot of great memories, I know they've been going now for, 4 weeks, 5 weeks or whatever, but you get off the plane in the palm trees, and it's just, you're down in Florida and it's baseball time, so it's just, it's exciting and it's fun, even though I haven't been around, it's just, baseball's just in you.
Some other notes. Northport has approved a spring training site for the Braves. There's still some other hurdles to take place, but we know the Braves are trying to move out of the Orlando area, and so you could have a situation where the Braves are right near where the Tampa Bay Rays train. Matt Carpenter is going to miss at least 1 more week because of back trouble, And Jason Kipnis, who's had some shoulder issues this spring, is ready to rejoin the Indians lineup. Let's get to it.
Seam heads rejoice.
Nerd alert!
It's Timmy time.
Is this a great game or what?
With Tim Kurkjian on Baseball Tonight.
And Tim Kurkjian covers baseball for ESPN, which means that time and again he has answered the question, what is the value of spring training? And Tim, I had a really interesting conversation with executives of the Tampa Bay Rays on Tuesday when I was at Steinbrenner Field. They were playing the Yankees, and we were talking about what the actual value of spring training is. And I mentioned this, you see it a lot where people say spring training doesn't mean anything. Justin Verlander tweeted out something about that yesterday after all the criticism of the Tigers pitchers. He said spring training doesn't mean bleep. And look, I get that perspective, and I mean, in reality, that none of these numbers count for anything. But on the other hand, and this is what I was talking about with the Rays executives, literally hundreds and hundreds of decisions are made by teams based on what they see in spring training, because either they see things that affirm what they believe, and they move forward with different plans they have, or they alter their plans. And every team has 3 or 4 guys who, going into spring training, look like they were either going to be a lock to make the team and they fall out of that, or they move into a situation where they're on the team because of how they perform. To you, what's the value of spring training?
Well, I think it's really important. This is why we spend 6 weeks on the road in spring training trying to see everything we can see. Now, to me, obviously, the most important thing is anyone coming back from an injury, how is he throwing, how is he moving. It's also really important, anybody making a position switch, how is that going? I remember seeing Mark Trumbo at third base in Tempe a few years ago, and it was fairly obvious just from infield that he wasn't going to be able to play third base on an extended basis. To me, that's the most important part about spring training is injury, recovery, and a change of position, or a guy taking up switch hitting, or whatever it is like that. And I'm not going to pay attention to whether a veteran player who is healthy is having a great spring or not if he has a proven track record. Jim Edmonds, a few years ago, the great Jim Edmonds, took himself out of the lineup, Buster, late in spring training and said, I'm getting too many hits down here. I don't want to play anymore. I'm going to use them all up. Nobody takes himself out of the lineup when they're swinging too well unless it's spring training, and that was the case with Jim Edmonds. Also, this may be an urban legend. I don't think so. Famously, Lou Piniella supposedly dropped a fly ball at right field once in like the 11th inning one afternoon in Pompano Beach because no one had any pitchers left, and he just wanted the game to be over. So the wins and losses are not that important either. Go back to last spring, Buster. I was with the Orioles. I walked in the room when they were like, they hadn't won any of their first 12, I think it was, exhibition games. They were like 0-10 with 2 ties, okay? And I had people everywhere in Florida telling me the Orioles are terrible. They stink. They're the worst team in Florida, and they made the playoffs. And the same spring, I had an American League manager tell me the best everyday lineup I have seen this spring is the Twins. And then, of course, the Twins came out of the gate as poorly as you can possibly play, had a horrendous season. So there are dangers with following the numbers and the wins and losses during spring training. They can be very misleading.
I agree with you about the wins and losses, and my favorite story about this, and I'm sure I've told it to you before, came from my time when I covered the Yankees. In the spring of '99, they were having a hard time, and George Steinbrenner, the Yankees owner, hated spring training losses, and he especially hated when they would lose to the Rays. And so they were going through a tough time, a losing streak. I think it was up to 8 games. And they lost a game at night, and Steinbrenner ordered Brian Cashman, his general manager, into his office and was berating him. His meeting went on all into the evening. And this was a team that was coming off a World Series championship, and yet we wondered that night if Steinbrenner was going to fire Brian Cashman, the general manager, because of how they were performing in spring training. And I remember staking out the elevator till late in the night. Steinbrenner slipped out a back door, and so the next morning we show up, and we don't know if someone's going to be let go that morning. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm standing outside the Yankees clubhouse with a bunch of other reporters, and Bernie Williams comes in. He's got pillow face because it's early in the morning, and he sees us all clearly on high alert, and he says, "What are you guys all doing here?" And I said, "Well, George is really unhappy because you guys are losing so many games." And Bernie looks at me and said, "We're losing games? How many?" He had no idea the Yankees were losing, that they were on a losing streak, because it didn't matter.
Right, and it doesn't matter, Buster. I told you this story that Larry Parrish of the Rangers in 1983, the playful, mischievous Larry Parrish, kind of half-jokingly, but only half-jokingly, told his teammates, because they were facing a veteran Royals pitcher that day, and it's right at the end of spring training, and he told his teammates, "Listen, I want you guys to make outs against this guy on purpose. Make him look as good as you can so he can make the team, and then we get to face him the first week of the season, and then we'll light him up when the real games count. So fail on purpose so he'll make the team." That's when I learned as a young writer that maybe the numbers of spring training can be misleading.
I doubt that was the case of what was going on Tuesday when Kevin Gausman of the Orioles was pitching against the Dominican Republic team. The lineup for the DR team, Tim, Jose Reyes, Manny Machado, Robinson Cano, Jose Bautista, Carlos Santana, Nelson Cruz, Starling Marte, Gregory Polanco, Wellington Castillo is the catcher. That's the DR lineup that Gausman faced. 3 hitless innings, 1 strikeout. When I was in Orioles camp, folks there were telling me this is the year when Kevin Gausman's going to go from being pretty good. And last year he had a good year, 9-12, but with a 3.61 ERA. This is the year where you might see this guy ascend into the upper levels, the upper echelons of starting pitchers in baseball. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, Buster. Now, we've been hearing this for several years, and I'm sure it got out a little bit too early, exactly how great this guy's stuff is, especially when he's thrown in the upper 90s with ridiculous off-speed stuff when he uses it properly. But he made a huge step forward last year, and this is why, as much as we talk about the terrible potential starting pitching the Orioles could have, you can't look at it that way as long as Kevin Gausman and maybe even Dylan Bundy are there, and they have a chance to be really good, both of them, but led by Gausman, who's now had this basically full year in a rotation, so there's no more back and forth. There's no more injuries at the moment. So I think, yes, I think he's got a chance to be a really good pitcher because that stuff plays anywhere.
And you mentioned last spring we were all saying that the Orioles were terrible, and they wound up, of course, making the playoffs. When I sat down with Adam Jones for the Baseball Tonight interview that we did, rapid-fire interview, the first thing he said to me before the microphone was turned on was, "Why do we always get underrated by all the statistical analysis that's done and by folks in the industry? Why are we always underrated?" And I think you could make a case that they could be again this year, because I think if you're picking this division, logic suggests it's probably Boston is the favorite. You look at the Yankees, they have a chance to get better because they have these young players who are getting better. Toronto, to me, has the best rotation in the division. I saw the Rays yesterday. They're very confident that they're going to be better than last year. The situation, again, I think is ripe to overlook the Orioles, and yet they could be good. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree, Buster. I mean, when you have a bullpen like that, when you have an infield defense like that, and I know they lost some power, but when you're going to hit over 200 home runs again, you're always in a game, especially when you got a manager that knows as well as anybody how to put together a rotation, how to use a bullpen, and how to get guys ready to play. I think the Orioles feed on that, and you're right. The statistical projections for them have been dead wrong for like 5 years in a row. And the common denominator there is manager Buck Showalter, who I think enjoys what people don't see. I know it's a tortoise and the hare kind of thing with the Orioles. They let all these guys go out and go sign and trade for the big guys, and then they always seem to sneak up at the end and be right there. And I fully expect that to happen again this year.
Tim, on Tuesday I got to see CeCe Sabathia pitch against the Rays, and I think that his transformation is complete. And I had my doubts a couple of years ago whether or not he'd be able to do this. I asked him when I was in Yankees camp about 10 days ago, how much longer do you want to pitch? And he said, look, as long as my right knee holds up, which, that's the spot that he lands on with 300 pounds every time he delivers the baseball. He said, I feel good. And I think he has made the transformation from the guy who could throw 95, 96 and blow it past hitters to a guy who now is like a great boxer who moves the ball around well enough to essentially keep from being hit with hard impact very often. And boy, watching him pitch yesterday, mixing in a curveball at 76 miles per hour, then, changing speeds on his cutter/slider, working to both sides of the plate. He's breaking bats yesterday. He's staying out of the middle of the plate. It never looked like the Rays ever had really good swings on him. And we know this. CeCe's one of these guys who, because he has a big smile and he's so nice to everybody, I think sometimes people don't understand how competitive he is. My sense is that he's now got that great pitcher's arrogance that I always used to see in Jamie Moyer, where somewhere deep down in his heart he was convinced that hitters were big, dumb oxen who were going to be exploited because they were just so anxious in trying to hit pitches. CeCe has been able to now get to a point where he's a pitcher very effective, changing speeds, moving the ball around. What do you think?
Yeah, Buster, the September numbers, as you know, were really, really good and very encouraging for him and the Yankees. But we all go back to when he was an overpowering 21-year-old, and he still, even back then, with spectacular stuff, knew exactly what he was doing out there. And this transformation really began a good 3 years ago. And I remember Buck Showalter telling me after one start he made against the Orioles, he said, that guy really knows how to pitch. He's not throwing as hard as he used to, but he really understands what this is all about. That was 3 years ago, and he's only gotten smarter since then. Plus, beyond being competitive, Buster, you know this, he is a great athlete, which belies the look that he has. But he's a great high school basketball player. He's a football player. And I remember doing a demo with Aaron Boone a couple springs ago about, the bunt play, what a third baseman does. And his point was you have to know who your pitcher is when you decide as a third baseman whether to charge here or stay at the bag. And he said, I said, well, who is the best pitcher you've ever played with to cover that third baseline on the bunt? He went, CeCe, he's the best. This is CeCe Sabathia at 300 pounds guarding that spot there against the bunt, so Aaron could hold third. It doesn't match with the body type, but he's a great athlete beyond how competitive he is.
Yeah, incredibly accountable, too. He essentially raised in a single-parent home by his mom, Margie, and I remember hearing stories about how tough she was, making sure that CeCe understood the way that she had to act. And think about this, Tim, because we know you hear stories about how, teenage star athletes are enabled. When he was, I think, a junior in high school, his mom told him, look, if you get a C in Spanish, I'm going to pull you off a team. So he gets done his football season. He, of course, is the star of the football team. He's a star of the basketball team. He's a star of the baseball team. He gets done in the football season. He comes home one day, and his mom is waiting for him, report card in hand. CeCe, I told you what would happen if you got a C in Spanish. Pulls Sabathia off the basketball team. And by the way, I think this is true, that the basketball team was coached by her brother, okay? So pulls the best basketball player off the team because he needed to be accountable for his grades. That was CeCe's mom, and that really is CeCe's demeanor. There's nobody more accountable than him.
Right, and they really need him too, Buster, in that rotation, which to me and everyone else is the weak spot of that club. If he can be the September pitcher for most of this season, then the Yankees have a much better chance to make the playoffs if he's at his best for 5-6 months.
You were in Nationals camp. What did you see?
Well, I saw a pretty darn good team, Buster, and obviously it's going to come down to start the season whether Max Scherzer is going to be 100% healthy. I'm not sure if we know that. I think they still think no matter what, they're going to get 200 innings out of him, maybe not 240, or whatever. But if he's healthy, I think they're going to be fine. I think their lineup is going to be really good. I had a long chat with Bryce Harper about some things about what pitchers did to him last year and what he understands about that now. And it also, of course, comes down to who's going to close for that team. Is it Blake Trinan? Is it Sean Kelly? I mean, there are big questions there still. That's what spring training's for. But I left thinking they're going to find a closer from within, and that will be a really big test for them.
What was your sense of Harper's sort of mental situation at this point after what was a tough year for him last year?
Yeah, he looked at me at the end of this just rambling little off the record, just kind of a fun, just a discussion, that's all. And he just looked at me and he said, "You know me," he said. "You know I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to hit 240, and I'm not afraid to hit 350." Meaning he's going to go up there and swing as hard as he can whenever he can. So I left thinking he's in a really good place mentally, and I'm certain, and there are no certainties in baseball. After looking at him in his eyes, I left thinking this guy's going to have a great year. Maybe not 2015 Bryce Harper, but a really, really good year and much, much better than last year.
The part of this team which I think is very underrated, Tim, is the 1-2 spots in this lineup. I don't know if folks realize how good Trey Turner and Adam Eaton might be going 1 and 2.
Yeah, and Buster, getting back to the original point here, don't forget that in spring training last year, at least when I went to see the Nationals, I was told that Trey Turner was a nervous wreck, okay, and he wasn't ready to start the season with the Nationals at any position. And then he came back for the second time and was absolutely tremendous. So sometimes spring training, guys just don't show what they need to show, and they're not ready. And Trey Turner maybe wasn't ready this time last year, but boy, when he came up, he was sensational the rest of the year. And if he and Adam Eaton get it going 1-2 or 2-1, however you want to put it, that's going to be a very good offensive team. And yet Dusty Baker, and I talked to Adam Eaton about this, is moving guys around. He's got Eaton hitting 6th. He's got a hit in 7th, just to see where the right mix is. But I think the best mix is going to be Turner 1, Eaton 2, and then they get to the big boys in the middle.
You also were in Astros camp when I was there. A couple things. A lot of excitement, obviously, about the depth in the lineup. A lot of excitement about the veterans and what they could add, and concern about the pitching. What did you see?
Yeah, that depth of lineup, Buster, is real. A.J. Hinch has all sorts of resources now and all sorts of options. So many teams are going this way, much like the Dodgers are, where they don't have 3 outfielders to everyday outfielders, but every day they're going to put 3 outfielders out there that can play. The Astros have something similar to that, but they also have everyday players. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I think they're going to score a whole bunch more runs than they did last year. But you're right, Buster. It comes down to Dallas Keuchel and Lance McCullers Jr. Both those guys with really good stuff have to be at their very best, and I was told they'll be ready for opening day. But there was a question, exactly how good will they be on opening day? Will they be at full strength? Will they be 100% ready to roll and ready to dominate on opening day? And I was told there's a big question about that. But if they can get those guys 100% dominant stuff by May the 1st, I still really like the Astros to make the playoffs in the American League.
We know that they had conversations with the White Sox during the winter about Jose Quintana. I think if we sit here today, they probably should be the favorites in that regard because they are the best team with the biggest hole in the rotation, and maybe at some point they decide they want to address it. Tim, thanks for doing this.
Okay, Buster, take care.
We'll be back in 1 minute with the Yankees' Matt Holliday. This spring, Baseball Tonight's gone from camp to camp to do rapid-fire interviews with players. This is one that Ali Leo Grande did one for Baseball Tonight with the Yankees' Matt Holliday. Give a listen.
Favorite movie?
Good Will Hunting.
Celebrity crush?
My wife.
Walk-up song?
Need to Breathe, Happiness.
Favorite player growing up?
Cal Ripken Jr.
If you weren't a baseball player, you'd be?
Football player.
Number of tattoos and your favorite tattoo?
2.
Which is your favorite?
Probably this one on my left arm.
Can you tell us what it is?
It's a Bible verse, Job 38:4.
Favorite emoji?
Probably the crying, laughing face. My wife likes affirmation on her jokes with that one.
Okay, great. And what are your personal rules on social media? How do you feel about it?
Don't operate on it. Stay away from it is pretty much how I try to handle that.
Simple and easy. Good. Who would you rank as the top player at your position and why?
I don't know what my position is anymore. If I'm an outfielder, say, I think Mike Trout is the best outfielder. I didn't play center field, so is there any other positions you'd like me? I just play a little first base.
DH?
I think David Ortiz, until he's officially not playing anymore, is probably the best DH. I don't know.
Are you not convinced he's...
Are there any more full-time DHs? Anybody suggestions?
Yeah, it's tough. Are you not convinced Poppy's done?
I guess I am if he says he is, but I mean he hit 310 with 40 homers last year. How
do you walk away?
Hey, good for him, good for us.
Yeah, for sure. What was it growing up that pushed or influenced you to pursue the baseball life?
My dad was a coach, or is a college coach, and that's pretty much where my brother and I grew up, was at the baseball field. So I didn't have a whole lot of choices. But no, I think just being around and seeing my dad's passion for baseball was the biggest influence.
If you were speaking to a group of kids, 8 or 9 years old, how would you convince them to play baseball?
Well, I would say that it's a great team environment, and it gives you an opportunity to interact with your friends, and so it's a very cerebral game. I think there's a lot more to it than just sort of maybe what people think, and plus you don't have to practice as much. We play every day, so there's none of the boring practices.
So what are you looking forward to most about being in a Yankee uniform, about being in pinstripes?
I think just representing the tradition of being a Yankee and playing in New York City and representing the most storied and successful franchise in baseball, and growing up being a big baseball fan as a kid and having a passion for the history of the game, putting on the pinstripes is going to be really exciting for me.
This team seems to be trending younger. How do you anticipate being a leader or a mentor to some of these younger guys?
You know what? I like to try to build relationships. I think leadership is comes out of getting to really know people and getting to know these guys. And then if something comes up where I feel like I can help them or they need something, then it's a much easier place to give advice or to be able to be a leader when you've established a relationship and they know you care about them more than just trying to tell them what to do. So it may take some time, but I feel like we have great leadership in place. So I don't want to come in and sort of say, I think that's disrespectful to guys like CeCe and Chase and Brett, and I'm probably leaving off some other guys, but some of the veterans that are already here. But I want to come in and get to know the guys and build relationships and just do my part.
Is there anyone you've gotten closest to, you've talked to the most so far this spring?
Well, Aaron Judge's locker's right next to mine, and he's in my hitting group, and so we've spent some time chatting, and he's a great kid, and somebody I've really enjoyed talking to so far. But there's a lot of them I've had some good interaction with, a lot of the young guys, but then also some of the guys that I've known a little bit with, like I said, Brett and CeCe and Chase and some guys.
Judge just hit that monster home run. What do you think of his power?
It's pretty much second to none as far as what I've seen in my career. So he's right there with Stanton as far as raw power that I've seen in batting practice and even in the game, like the home run he hit the other day. Just a monster of a human being.
Last question. So I read that you recently had a long conversation with Clint Frazier. What did you tell him? What did he ask you?
He's got a lot to learn about. I'll just say it. No, just personal stuff that I would probably ask him to share. It's not really my place. We just had a conversation about life, baseball, going from kind of man stuff, like, to going from being a young guy and coming not long out of high school with high expectations, and this is a time when you learn how to become a man. So just some stuff that I wouldn't be comfortable sharing because it's it's personal and stuff that I would let him share if he wants to.
It's time for some Inside Heat on Baseball Tonight.
Jesse Rogers covers the Chicago Cubs for ESPN Chicago. And Jesse, you had a really interesting piece that first appeared on ESPN.com on Tuesday. It's about the Cubs, and they're dealing with these new anti-hazing measures. And I got to tell you, the first thing that I thought of when I saw those new rules put in place against hazing, was the Cubs. Because they're the team that's out there with different outfits, and they get on planes with the theme of the day, that sort of thing. And obviously, Major League Baseball is going to, I think, be aggressive is too strong of a word, but they're going to be monitoring this whole thing this year. And based on players that you spoke to in the organization, it feels like it's still a work in progress in terms of how they're going to handle it.
Yeah, let me be clear. They're going to move on from dressing up players as cheerleaders or princesses. They're not going to break the rules. They'll find other ways to make these rookies feel uncomfortable. And that is an important word in Cubs camp. Joe Maddon doesn't do these things just to do them. There's a purpose behind all of this. Last year, he made players wear zany suits, not to the ballpark, but out and about in Pittsburgh, I believe they were. If you went to Starbucks, you had to be wearing this crazy suit. His feeling is this: if you are uncomfortable, or if you get used to being uncomfortable in your everyday life, then when you're on the mound in Game 7, which they were this past season, maybe you won't be so uncomfortable in front of 40,000 screaming fans. He understands today's athlete, pretty coddled, multi-million-dollar guys, chartered play. He wants them to feel that uncomfortability before they take the field. So there's some method to his madness here. And the players, especially the old-school guys, Buster, John Lackey, Miguel Montero, Jake Arrieta, they just want nothing to do with this hazing rule because they don't think it's hazing. And the biggest takeaway for me, Buster, was talking to the rookies that went through it last year, Rob Zestrizny, Albert Almora Jr. They were emotional in retelling their stories of walking to the ballpark, again, in this case in Pittsburgh, later in the season. Zestrizny dressed up as a cheerleader with Travis Wood on one side of him, John Lackey on the other, walking from the hotel to the park. He felt part of the team. It was a rite of passage for these guys. So it's really strange for the, quote, victims of it, the rookies, to be enjoying it. The veterans who did it themselves years ago to be loving, bringing these rookies into the team. And yet baseball says, no, there's some outside influences that don't like this. We know the politically correct world we live in. And so they've come down with this new rule. So again, players are against it. They don't like it. They had some strong quotes about it, but they'll live with it and they will move on.
Now, I think they'll live with it, and I think they'll intend to follow the guidelines, but I would not at all be surprised over the course of a long season if the Cubs bump up against these rules, where there might be a letter headed their way saying, this thing that you did in Pittsburgh in 2017 runs counter to this, and we want you to be aware of this. Would you agree with me that I think they'll go right up to the line?
You're probably right. I would say Joe Maddon won't be the guy that does that, though. Maybe the players. I just mentioned a veteran group, and you can't find more old school guys than John Lackey and Miguel Montero. I think Maddon, he's a guy that understands the world we live in and the message it sends. Even though he completely backed his players when it came to the dress up stuff. So you might be right about the players. But I think Joe's going to do everything he can to at least conform to what the Major League Baseball wants.
Well, the Cubs, like all teams, have bigger issues that they're dealing with in spring training. There's none bigger than Jason Hayward, who has retooled his swing after a disastrous 2016 offensive season. He was very good defensively helped them win a World Series, made that famous speech during the rain delay in Game 7 of the World Series. But we talked about it again on the podcast with Keith Law on Tuesday. I don't think any player needs a fast start more than Jason Hayward to demonstrate to the Cubs that he's turned around offensively, because I don't think they'll watch him struggle all year the way they did last year without making an adjustment in how much he plays. What have you seen in his adjustments so far this spring?
Well, it does look different, especially the stance, but I don't know if the swing is all that different, Buster. His hands are lower when he starts. The idea was to relax him. The whole goal was to get him in a better hitting position sooner. But when he starts that swing again, Buster, it kind of does look similar to what we've seen in the past. Now, he did break out these last few days. He started 0 for 15 in the Cactus League. He had a double and a home run 2 days ago, had a nice line shot to left field yesterday, so he is taking lefties the other way, both the double and then yesterday's shot was against the lefty. So there is some progress, I suppose, but I don't think that just if you're watching on TV, you are going to see much different right now with that swing. You will see the stance different, though. It was interesting. They had him leading off to get him some more at-bats, to get him used to this thing and the whole muscle memory, and he started 0 for 15. Then the other day, they lowered him in the lineup, and he started to have some success, and he felt like maybe, being the first guy up just wasn't right for him. He felt like maybe he needed to see the pitcher a little bit. I know we're grasping at straws a little bit, but he did have a little bit more success. So, no surprise. He's going to start low in the lineup for the Cubs come April. He's not a main cog on offense. He can sort of hide a little bit, although you can't hide 7 years left on that contract, obviously, and the huge money. So it's definitely a work in progress, Buster. I say at least he's made some strides these last few days, really on time at least. But the swing is just, at BP he's been really good. I'll give him that. There has been a difference in batting practice. I've seen him launch some balls more often and with a higher trajectory than I'm used to seeing. He hasn't completely translated over to games. So the best I can say is it's a work in progress right now.
How is he handling the scrutiny? We know Jason's a great guy, but it's not easy to answer those questions day in and day out.
He's handling it great. I will give him tons of credit. I will always give him credit for that. He handled it great last year. He's handling it great this year. For example, he had the 2 hits and basically had to have a press conference after the game. I mean, there were 15 media members crammed at Diablo Tempe Stadium to talk to Jason Hayward. In fact, because the media session with him went so long, when the starters come out of the game, they want to get the heck out of there in a road game. Well, They missed their window to walk on the field because Hayward's presser went so long. So here was Bryant, Hayward, Schwarber walking through the concourse during the game to get to their van to get them out of there at Tempe Diablo Stadium, all because of Hayward's press conference running too long. And this is just after getting 2 hits in a spring game. So the focus is there. He's handling it great. How long can he sort of deal with that spotlight if he's not going well? Well, he did all of last year, but we'll see if he can handle it the second year. It's not easy, but that's the guy that can handle it because he's got such a great character behind him and a lot of people rooting for him for sure.
One of the big stories that's going to hover over the Cubs this year is the looming free agency of Jake Arrieta. 2 things about that. One, I think there's almost no chance that the Cubs re-sign him. I think he'll move on to another team when the year's over. And 2, I think this situation will have no impact on the Cubs or on Arrieta because I think Jake is so driven, one way or the other, it doesn't really make a difference. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what I'd like to think. I can't get inside of his head. He's very driven. He's very confident. And it reminds me a little bit of Hayward when he signed with the Cubs, some of the things he said. My point being, when you're an elite player, whether Jake Arrieta gets $210 million or $180 million, he wants to get the max, of course, but he's going to be okay. And he has said that. I'm getting paid right now through arbitration $15 million. He's been real honest about this. I know I'm going to get a payday. Whatever that number is, it's going to set me up for life. So I don't think he's too concerned about it. I don't know if he really cares if he breaks records and things like that. Some of that stuff is internalized between him and Scott Boras. But knowing his demeanor, like you said, He's pretty driven. He's 31, but really has a body of a 21-year-old, the way that guy keeps in shape. So it really is just about going out there and executing his pitches. It's not like he's had any arm problems recently. That cutter is his out pitch. It wasn't as good last year. He already said in his first spring start he felt like it was better than a lot of last year during the regular season and postseason. So, if he has that big year, man, maybe he gets that $200 million. But you're right. I think most people agree he's probably going to move on. Theo left the door open for a situation where he becomes a free agent and he still signs back with the Cubs. I don't think that happens very often, but with the Cubs, I suppose that's possible. It's such a great place to play, and I think Jake likes it so much. My feeling has always been if he gets to November, he's gone. But I'll always leave that door open because the Cubs are such a great place to play right now.
Last one for you. Got about 60 seconds left. You got a piece up today about how the Cubs, of course, have these great young players in their everyday lineup, have a lot of blocked prospects right now. Tell me about those guys.
Yeah, they do. There's a few of them. Jeimer Candelario, switch hitter, plays third base. Can't play there. Chris Bryant's there. Trying to play some first base. Can't make the majors there. Anthony Rizzo plays there. So it's just a good example of a guy that's major league ready. In fact, Theo told me yesterday that on other teams, people will be talking about him as a potential rookie of the year. But he's going to be stuck in the minors unless they take him as a bench player. So there's 3 or 4 of those type of guys, Candelario being the best of them, completely blocked by the All-Stars ahead of them. That puts them in the Daniel Vogelbach or Gleyber Torres situation where they will be dangled come July 31st. Now, when I mentioned these prospects, none of them are on the mound. So once again, the Cubs' task over the next 3 to 4 months is to find some pitching they can keep and utilize past this season, some young pitching. Well, that's where these guys that are being blocked will be used for if it's there. So look for some young prospects to be traded just like Torres was last year, whether it be for an immediate need or a longer-term need. The Cubs view the trade deadline as not just getting a guy for this season. If they can work it for the future, they'll do that as well. And they know that teams tend to dump players, obviously, on July 31st, not just, in order to make your team a World Series contender, but also to make you better for the future. And that's what we'll see out of these prospects come June and July this year.
I lied. I'm going to have one follow-up on that. You
Sure.
and I talked during the wintertime. Actually, remember, I reported at one point that there was no chance that the Cubs and the White Sox would execute a Chris Sale trade, and there was no chance it was ever going to happen. I do think that there's more of a possibility that if the Cubs wanted to, they could trade for Jose Quintana, because I think now, the White Sox, they're down the rebuilding road. The fans understand that. Jose Quintana is a terrific pitcher, but he's not Chris Sale, but he has a great contract that would be perfect for the Cubs, be perfect for any team, because it's so team-friendly, and who knows, maybe you could put together a package for the White Sox for Jose Quintana. Would you agree with me that there's more of a chance that the Cubs could make a deal with the White Sox and Quintana than Sale?
Yeah, I think on the surface, there's no doubt. I mean, whether they'd actually pull it off or not, I don't know, but you're so right. And also, I think on Rick Hahn's part, he's getting to the point where he's got to make the next step, or he's got to make the next move at some point here. I think between now and July 31st is his time to continue to sell off those veterans, Todd Frazier, Quintana. It would make a lot of sense. We saw at the Cactus League Media Day, Hahn and Hoyer talking, and I took a picture and tweeted it out and said, hey,
I saw that.
Caption contest. The first guy back is, all right, so will you take, so-and-so for Quintana? What do you want for this? They have made deals in the past. Rick Hahn, Theo, and Jed, I think they're above the pettiness of, you can't trade with the Cubs, you can't trade with the White Sox. That doesn't mean that ownership is above it. I think management is. Yeah, so I think, sure, there's a possibility. If the Cubs lost a pitcher, because they don't have a lot of depth, that's where you really want to see what would happen in terms of making that phone call. But they're not desperate right now. They certainly will be soon enough to replace Arrieta and possibly Lackey, who's going to be 39, final year of his deal as well. So it's something to keep an eye on for sure, Buster.
Jesse, thanks for doing this. Great to talk with you.
Anytime, Buster. Talk to you soon, pal.
Bleacher Tweets.
First one today, Buster, from Nolan Scad, at Nolan Scad. And Nolan says, if the Diamondbacks aren't in the wild card hunt come July, does Zach Greinke's contract make him untradeable?
Untradeable, absolutely, if the Diamondbacks expect another team to take on the whole contract.
Right.
And I've had executives of other teams tell me that they think the Diamondbacks would have to eat $50 million, perhaps to $75 million of the money owed to Greinke and his deal, which is something in the range of $170 million at this point. So here's the good thing from the Diamondbacks' perspective. They have this new front office regime has taken over, and they didn't have anything to do with the Greinke signing, so they can go to ownership and say, look, this is something we need to do because this player takes up so much of our payroll space.
Absolutely. Next one, Buster, from Nicole McMahon, at Nicole McMahon 1. And Nicole says, with all the young talent with the New York Yankees, who do you think will be the hardest player to send to AAA?
I'm sure that the Yankees front office is going to be very tempted at some point this year to call up Gleyber Torres because, my goodness, does he look great. He's having a tremendous spring training after being the youngest player ever to win the MVP of the Arizona Fall League. But here's the thing. They've got Starlin Castro at second base. They've got Chess Headley at third base with 2 years left. I do think that if Headley struggles in the first couple months of the season, then you might see them call up Torres, install him at second base, and move Starlin Castro over to third base.
It's going to be a tough decision for the team that's number one in the spring training power rankings, Buster. Speaking of spring training, next question from Don Irvine, at Don Irvine. A very simple question. What's a better location for spring training, Arizona or Florida?
I will defer to folks in baseball, and privately, virtually all of them will tell you Arizona, because no matter who you're playing, you're probably not going to have to travel more than an hour, whereas in Florida, there are some really, really long road trips. Although, I tell you this, the Nationals and the Astros are so excited about their new complex now, which is tremendously cut down on their travel tremendously. And we mentioned at the top of the podcast, the Braves might move down closer to Fort Myers, so you'd have a little 14 pod there between the Twins, the Red Sox, the Rays, and the Braves, as well as the Orioles and the Pirates just north of them. The team at that point you don't want to be, the Tigers in Lakeland, right?
Yeah.
They've got this great new complex that they've done, and from all I've heard, their renovations they've done are great, but in terms of travel, ugly.
You know what my favorite spring training location is, Buster?
In the podcast studio.
That's right. Well, and anywhere there are birds. And there are birds here. So, yes, that gets my vote. Next one from Quincy Wheeler, at Dreaming Baseball. And this is a really interesting one, Buster. Quincy says at age 25, Babe Ruth hit 44 home runs. Hank Aaron hit 39. Willie Mays hit 36. And Barry Bonds hit 33. Some good research there from Quincy. How many homers do you predict in 2017 from a 25-year-old Mike Trout?
I'll take the bait. He's going to hit 45. In other words, more than Ruth, more than Aaron, more than Mays, more than Bonds.
Love it.
He is an inner circle Hall of Famer.
No question about it, Buster. A couple more. First one from School of Sweat, at School of Sweat. And he says, last year you said Alex Rodriguez would play again. Now you're saying David Ortiz is coming back. When will you accept that they're gone, Buster?
Never. I can't take it. I got to have him back.
Just let it go.
Fair question.
Just
Fair
let it
question.
Go. Absolutely. Finally, this one from Joe Peters, at Joe Peters 17. What will the Pirates do about Austin Meadows if Kutch returns to form? Surely they wouldn't trade Meadows, would they?
Well, when they were talking about Jose Quintana, and I don't know this for sure, but I know this is the assumption among folks I talk to in baseball. They assume that the White Sox were saying you have to put Meadows in the deal if you want to get Quintana. The price was too high for the Pirates, and they backed away from that ask, whatever it was exactly. And here's the thing. Even if Andrew McCutchen returns to form this year, he's going to be traded, and more likely next winter if the Pirates are in contention this year. And Meadows is sitting there waiting to take that outfield spot that's going to be left behind by Andrew McCutchen.
You could have just gone with a really simple answer there, Buster. You could have said no, and don't call me Shirley.
There you go.
Keep those Bleacher Tweets coming. Use the hashtag Bleacher Tweets.
One last thing.
On this day in baseball history, in 1930, a record-setting contract. Babe Ruth inked a 2-year deal with the Yankees for $160,000. The highest-paid player of all time. The team's general manager, Ed Barrow, predicted at that moment, quote, no one will ever be paid more. Josh, what do you think?
What an idiot.
Oh, what a loser!
Yeah, he was just a little bit off on that.
He was a little off. That 2-year, $160,000 deal, it's been surpassed only a billion times.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think he would have said if he had seen A-Rod's deal with the Rangers a few years back?
He just would have had a heart attack.
Absolutely.
Right there.
If he wasn't already dead,
otherwise he would have had a heart attack.
I was going to say, if he wasn't already dead, that would have killed him, right?
Exactly. Well, that's it for today. My thanks to Matt Holliday, to Jesse Rogers, to Tim Kurkjian, to Josh Macri, who produces this podcast every single day. Have a great day, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Baseball Tonight podcast. If you're playing fantasy baseball, don't forget to listen to the Fantasy Focus podcast. Check out all podcasts at ESPN.com/PodCenter. Baseball Tonight, the podcast.